If you saw my last video, you might remember that I have been searching for pictures of these art prints that were in the restaurant round the corner in the 80s and 90s. No matter how hard I have tried, I have not had any luck in finding these. But going through old mall pictures and old newspaper articles sparked something creative in me. When I was younger, I used to make little dioramas and all sorts of miniature scenes, but as I've gotten older and busier, I just kind of stopped. But I have been wanting to start again. Since I don't have a picture of the art print, and I already did as good as I could recreating it based on my memory with my limited artistic ability, I decided to make a diorama depicting one of the phones instead of focusing on the print again. So I started by soldering a little orange LED. At round the corner there were brown phones at every booth, and you would use that phone to order. And then when your order was ready, the little orange light in the front would flash and the kitchen would call you to let you know you could come to the window to pick your food up. I thrifted this yellow frame and painted the cardboard that came in the back of it like a little wall, and then I started constructing the phone out of clay and added the LED to the middle. I recently learned how to solder LEDs and connect them to little battery packs or USB cords, and so I have been doing a lot of experimenting with putting those in little miniature scenes. I've always loved making silly little things out of polymer clay, but I don't consider myself an expert, and I'm definitely not good enough to be a hyper-realist. So I decided, for the sake of my sanity, not to aim for hyper-realism and to be just a little bit more cartoony and silly with my direction, so that way I'm not making myself crazy trying to make everything perfect. Because really, with me starting to craft again, it's just reminding myself that I can and that it's something I enjoy and that I want to set aside time for. So instead of trying to focus on a perfect outcome, I'm trying to just focus on enjoying the process and having fun being creative. I'd mentioned in my previous video that the first jalapeno poppers I ever ate were at Round the Corner, and they're still some of my favorite jalapeno poppers I ever had. They filled them with cream cheese and they had a berry sauce on the side instead of ranch. Arby's and their Bronco berry sauce are actually probably the closest match. So I attempted to make some rough jalapeno popper shapes from clay, and then I tried to 3D print a very downsized, formerly full-size fry basket, and the printer didn't like that too much, but it was good enough. And I added a little bit of diluted glue and then acrylic paint to a piece of shop towel and made it into a liner for my basket. I found a picture of an old menu online and I printed that out in a small size that ended up being a little bit too small, but that's okay. I decided to roll with it instead of wasting paper. I also thought maybe the larger phone and smaller menus and a slightly tilted table might sort of offer a child's perspective, since I was a child when I was going to Round the Corner. And I was always focused on those art prints as well as the phone, and the food was always good and I loved it, but it wasn't the main attraction. Since I decided that I was going more cartoony and whimsical, I thought I could see if I could use glitter as the breading on the jalapeno poppers I was making, and they turned out okay. Probably not something I'll be recreating, but good enough, which also applies to this little sauce cup I was trying to make. That extra mold here didn't work out with my UV resin just because it was too opaque. Next, I prepped the table into the frame, and the table is just made of a little piece of beech wood that I aged with some acrylic paint, and I broke a little piece off, which I glued back on, and it just ended up helping with the aging. I tried to offset the table in the frame a bit so it looked more like a piece of a bigger table instead of the entire table. I had previously painted this little cardboard square brown, and now I coated it with UV resin to give it a little bit more of a plastic look. And from there, I also coated the menus with UV resin to hold them in place. I folded the prints together, and then I also gave them a little bit more of a weathered feel to almost feel like they were being held by invisible hands. Since the menus were smaller than I wanted, part of my plan was to try to place them a little bit further back on the table to try to force a perspective like the adults were a little bit further in the booth and the viewer is a little bit closer to the phone. In hindsight, I should have punched a hole for the wires before I coated this in UV resin, but I did attach the phone to the back, and then it was the phone's turn to get a UV resin coat to make it shiny. I think the UV resin really helped it a lot. And from there, I added a little piece of the copper wire that I used to wire the LED just as the brown cord because it was the perfect shade. I attached the phone to the back part a little bit askew just to lean into the cartoony aspect of it. And overall, I think it turned out pretty cute. I filed down my monstrosity of a sauce cup. I hope to experiment more with mold making in the near future, but for this one I just called it good enough and ended up liking it because it reminded me of these glass cups that were part of a McDonald's promotion for the Flintstones movie in the early 90s. I thrifted the frame before I even had the idea for the project. I just liked the way it looked and it ended up working really well. I mixed some pink into some UV resin and used it to represent my jelly dipping sauce, and I thought that worked too. Next, I assembled my jalapeno popper basket. I arranged it on the table and then did some final touch-ups on the poppers themselves. I painted the jalapenos as diced up in the popper. I can't quite remember if that's how they were or if it was a larger quarter of the pepper. I got my glittery jalapeno poppers all arranged in the basket and glued them in and just finished getting everything all set up. I forgot to film soldering the wires to the battery pack and turning the LED on, which might have been the most exciting part. But overall, I'm happy with how this turned out, and I really enjoyed this project and how it reminded me how much I like to research and create, and that it's not just something that I used to do, it's something that I can still do too.